Okay, so welcome to Infinigate TV. I'm here with Mr. Ron Clarkson, who is the VP of Global Communication in Trend Micro. We're happy to have you.
Thanks a lot. I'm glad to be here.
Good. Hope you're having a good time in Norway.
So far, so good.
Okay, good. So, Ron, I know you have been talking a lot about targeted attacks over the last few days to the press and to some of our channel partners throughout the Nordics. Could you just briefly, go through what it is, and who's behind it, and how are these things organized? We'll do some questions as we go along, but what is it? What is it basically?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, like as you said, we're just going around and we're talking to customers, partners, and journalists.
Yeah.
And it's not a discussion about Trend Micro products or Trend Micro as a company. It's really a discussion about education, because we feel that, as has been done time and time again, the bad guys have changed the rules of the game, and as an industry, from a vendor perspective, from a distributor perspective, from a reseller perspective, from a customer perspective, we're not reacting agile enough to be effective in combating these new rules. And so the presentation that I'm using this week, it just kind of talks about the history of targeted attacks. What are some of the methods that the bad guys use, and who are the bad guys? And we just spend a little bit of time talking about the 4 different types of potential bad guys. There's the possibility that they are state-sponsored, which is when we hear about attacks, we always want to know, was it China? Was it Russia?
Exactly.
Was it US? And that's our vision of vast cyber armies that are sponsored by the state, that are in the military or related to the military. So we talk about that. There's also the reality that they may be organized crime. And I think that's probably the deeper reality here, is that a lot of the attacks that we're seeing right now are probably based in an organized crime organization, a very intelligent, a very educated, and a very sophisticated organized crime organization. Then we have what I call a hobbyist. Just like people have hobbies to play PC games, or to work on ham radios, or to cook in the kitchen, or to shop. There are people out there that like to download these tools and tinker with them and learn from them and just see what's possible. And that brings up another point that we're talking about a lot, is these tools are becoming democratized, meaning that they're becoming packaged more and more effectively, almost like commercial software, and very easy to get your hands on, very cost effective for just a few $100 American. It's easy to access these kits to perform these attacks, or even to rent a botnet, right? So it's very easy for someone like a hobbyist just to play with this. And then the 4th one, which we see is growing in significance, and also from a worry perspective, are what we would call the hacktivists. Now, a hacktivist is an organization that's not necessarily politically motivated, not necessarily financially motivated, and there's no doubt that their actions in terms of accessing data and computer systems that they don't own, there's no doubt that these are illegal actions. But when I say that they're hacktivists, and sometimes their motives are questionable, it's because one day they might attack a criminal organization, or a corporation that everybody deems as a bad corporation, whatever the case may be, right? I don't want to get into that discussion. But on the very next day, they may turn their attention to child pornographers. And perform some of the same activities to bring down a child pornography ring. And so it's a really difficult discussion around the hacktivists, because how do you predict that? It's very hard to see what their motivation is and where they'll strike next. So those are the 4 different types of attacks and attackers that we're talking about this week.
Cool. So how do you, these organizations that are becoming more and more professional, how do they recruit the talent? Do we know anything about that? Do we know how and why? I know there's obviously money involved. Sure. But if you're a talented security person, why do you choose a bad organization instead of going to work for a security company? Yeah,
that's a really good question. That's a really good question, and it's the kind of question that movies are made of. I think the answer is, the answer is that we don't exactly know for sure. Let me say, I don't know. I'm sure there are people out there that do know. The guidance that I give people is this. There's no reason to think that, and let's talk about state-sponsored organizations, military, government, whatever the case may be. Let's focus on them, and let's focus on cybercrime for just a second. As we're thinking about this, and we're thinking about how do we defend ourselves from these types of organizations, the best rule of thumb that I can come up with is, why would you treat them any differently than, say, any other military organization or law enforcement organization or whatever the case may be in terms of how they do what they do, how they recruit, where they get their funding from. I think that cyber, as a high-level word, is a tool, much like a weapon, or and much like a weapon or even a screwdriver. The tool in and of itself is not evil. The tool in and of itself is not bad. It's the person that's wielding the tool and their motivations and their intentions. And so when we look at a state-sponsored government organization, I think it's the same discussion there. They're recruiting and building these teams the same way that they've always done. For criminals, organized crime, it's very much the same thing, but compare them to a business. There's no reason to think that they're not recruiting people straight out of university, right? They're flush with cash. They're professional organizations. They have access to all of the same infrastructure that we have access potentially as businesses. They can use the cloud just like we can use the cloud. And so that's the best rule of thumb that I have is, let's try not to romanticize these things and turn them into some kind of secret organization. I think the best way to think of them is government organizations and business organizations.
Just going back to what you said about the kind of commercialization of the kits. You're able to download whatever, you can buy a software tool that can execute and do whatever damage. I heard that all these tools that you download, the people who made the tool, they also made some kind of backdoor to the tool, so that when you, as a player, you sit home, you download the tool, and you try to do something, you actually don't know what you're doing. You are actually working for someone who made the tool. How do we secure that? Is there?
So I think in general the way that we secure that is the same way we would secure anything. Which I think the first step is around education. The weakest link has, and always has been, and probably always will be, you and me as the user. You can have all the security in the world, but if the bad guys understand the user's motivation well enough, then they can use that behavior to their advantage. So when you look at one of these free media players, I want to watch a video very badly, no matter what the content of that video might be, and so I'm going to go out and try to find whatever tools I can to be able to load this video because I want something. And so therefore the bad guys, if they can harness that want into what looks like a valid tool to deploy, it's very easy. We see this a lot happening on Android, especially in Asia, because in Asia there are various Android markets that you can download software from. Would you like a free copy of Angry Birds? Heck yes, I'd like a free copy of Angry Birds, right? And so from the standpoint of education is number one, but then we have to use security tools and awareness, just like we always had, to find them.
So we're running out of time, but just to add, one more topic into the whole bucket of targeted attacks. Mobility. Is that a? I mean, I would assume that is a huge, important dimension in these targeted attacks, discussions. And we are becoming totally device independent. We if there's no Wi-Fi, we don't have to, why is there another Wi-Fi here?
That's right.
How is that utilized in the whole discussion of targeted attacks?
Sure. I think it's definitely part of the discussion, but it's part of the discussion in multiple ways. One is this whole consumerization of devices that are the R&D and the deployment of them are funded by consumers rather than organizations. What that means is that there's an unprecedented amount of devices that are flooding our enterprise IT organizations. So the first thing it does is just create a tremendous amount of noise for an IT security professional.
Yeah, definitely.
And a tremendous amount of noise that is backed by the business. So in a lot of cases, we see the IT security professionals almost being told to stand down because business has to move forward, because we're all in it for the business, right? So that's one way that a lot of people don't think about, and it makes it much easier for the bad guys to come into another direction. The other thing that I always try to discuss in this conversation is, let's not forget that as prevalent as the mobile devices are, that still the number one infection vector in targeted attacks is email. Traditional email on a PC or Mac with over 91%. But on the mobile devices themselves, I think the number one concern that customers have, rightfully so, is the data on those devices, and whether those devices are going to be lost or stolen or data is inadvertently leaked by the user. I think that's their number one concern. Now the fourth point is, I think attacks are coming. There have certainly been attacks on Android. It's a much more open device. In terms of ranking security of the top vendors, BlackBerry is certainly still the first, then iOS, and then Android. But the reality that we also have to understand is that there's a piece of the mobile devices that we don't often pay attention to, and that's the baseband, right? That's the piece, or that's the chip in the software that controls how that device connects to the infrastructure. Okay, and if you look at the conversations that are happening in the black hat type organizations and some of the trade shows and things like that, you'll see that these types of discussions are happening more and more. And so what I would say is, be aware of it, know that it's happening, and we see a lot of customers when they travel to countries like China where there's a lot of these activities, or even just out of the country in general, they'll give people a burner phone that's temporary in nature and use that one while they're gone, and then wipe it whenever they get back.
Exactly. Okay, so to conclude, we need to. So we have been on the 50,000 feet level now. Trend Micro solutions to all this. Deep Discovery is kind of the platform we're talking about. 2 minutes on Deep Discovery.
Yeah. So Deep Discovery allows us to change the discussion, right? If you think about IT security, for 15, 20 years, we've had a layered defense, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But we've had more of a fortress mentality. We worry about the perimeter, and the perimeter is important, but we put our crown jewels in the middle and then protect it with big, thick walls. And we pour money into making these walls bigger and higher and deeper. What Deep Discovery allows users to do is to recognize that chances are very high your perimeter's already been breached. We haven't lost that battle to a certain extent, but we have to recognize that your user is the weakest link, and so there is most likely malicious software inside your organization you don't understand. So now what do? If it's a targeted attack, then likely they know what endpoint security you're running, they know what other kind of perimeter security you're running, and so they're using intelligence to get around that. So now what I have to do is use a product like Deep Discovery to look at the network, to try and identify the traffic of this software moving laterally within an organization or communicating back to a command and control server. Deep Discovery is very interesting because it's not just about the network. It's a breed of new products that allows you to take network traffic with a single product and correlate that with sandbox activity. So as a payload comes in, we can actually run it in a user customized sandbox to make it look exactly like one of your PCs. And we can see what's going to happen in that sandbox. And the product will then correlate that behavior with the network communication and identify a threat. So that's Deep Discovery in a nutshell.
Okay, good one. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
This is much we have time for. Okay, følg med videre på Infinigate TV.
Besøk oss gjerne på internett, www.infinigate.no, eller ring 67 10 18 00.